Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. My mama used to say that those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that's a paraphrase of a rather famous quotation to that degree. I've never actually bothered to go look up the quotation because I find that to be intrinsically true. If you think about it, we were sort of asleep at the switch on December 7th, and as a result, we suffered Pearl Harbor, and then on December 8th in the Philippines when our airplanes were bombed during the beginning of World War II. And we were caught with our, basically asleep at the switch. And because we didn't appreciate that history, that's sort of why 9/11 happened. We ignored all of the danger signs and the warning signals that we got, and we wound up with 9/11 as a result. So one of the things that I think is really important when you talk about the law is a good understanding of the history that's involved. So although I do not have that little bow tie, and I'm probably not nearly as elegant looking as the history guy, today I'm going to play the history guy, and we're going to go back and figure out what the foundations of due process are. And due process is one of those words that you hear or phrases that you hear, and you think, well, that just means the government has to play by the rules. But that is not nearly a good enough explanation of what due process actually is. The reason we have due process clause in the Fifth Amendment and later in the 14th Amendment is it grew out of the abuses of power by the Crown in England. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is the Star Chamber. The Star Chamber was a court of law in England that operated from the late 15th century to the mid-17th century. Its name is believed to have originated from the star-patterned ceiling of the room in the Westminster Palace where it initially met. The Star Chamber was established as a supplement to the ordinary legal system or the common law system, particularly to deal with cases involving high-ranking nobles and government officials. Juries of their peers were unlikely to convict noblemen of crimes because they were noblemen, but there was a belief that they had to be held accountable. And the desire to make everyone equal before the law wound up making some more equal than others. And while this was initially applauded by the populace because, hey, these guys that would ordinarily skate on these big crimes are now being held accountable, they later came to regret their endorsement of this process. So it gained prominence during the reign of King Henry VII, and was used extensively by the Tudor monarchs, including Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Originally intended as a means to provide a fair and impartial justice, the Star Chamber gradually became associated with arbitrary and tyrannical practices. Its procedures were secretive. In other words, the whole process was held in secret. You could be told the result, but you couldn't sit in and watch the trial the way you can in any American courtroom today. It relied on the examination of witnesses rather than formal trials. And the accused before the Star Chamber faced what I would call a trilemma. Questions would be put to him. He was required to tell the truth. If he lied, he was convicted as a perjurer. And in most cases, when he said, "I'm innocent, I didn't do that," he was convicted as a perjurer even if he was innocent. And if he perjured himself, that meant that he really was guilty, so he was going to suffer the consequences. If he told the truth and admitted that he was guilty, he was going to suffer the consequences. If he just refused to answer, the Crown then assumed that a truthful answer would convict him. So there really was no way to beat that system. The Star Chamber could also dispense with legal safeguards that we now think of as being mandatory. Trial by jury, and the right to confront one's accusers are often thought of as having originated with the Star Chamber. And interestingly enough, the right of counsel originated with the Star Chamber. People had to have a lawyer represent them before the Star Chamber. And if they could not get a lawyer to represent them before the Star Chamber or to endorse their pleas, they were just convicted. There was no need to question them, no need for evidence. They couldn't get a lawyer to represent them, so they must be guilty. The court's powers extended beyond ordinary legal matters, and they encompassed things like sedition and slander and political dissent. And it became notorious for its use as a tool of royal authority to suppress opposition and maintain order. Under the Tudors, like King Henry VIII, it was instrumental in enforcing the monarch's will and punishing those that the crown thought of as being threats. The Star Chamber's unchecked power eventually became a source of discontent. The English nobility and the emerging gentry class did not appreciate the way it was handled, and its arbitrary rulings and lack of accountability led to widespread criticism and opposition. The Star Chamber could be manipulated by the powerful to serve their own interests, often at the expense of justice and fairness. The lack of transparency and accountability in its proceedings allowed for corruption and abuse of power to flourish, and it undermined the rule of law and public trust in the legal system. In 1641, during the English Civil War, the Long Parliament abolished the Star Chamber as part of its efforts to curtail the authority of King Charles I. The court was seen as a symbol of royal tyranny, and its abolition was welcome, especially by the people who thought that parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law ought to be the order of the day. The demise of the Star Chamber marked a significant moment in the development of English legal and constitutional history. It helped pave the way for the establishment of principles such as the supremacy of Parliament, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual rights, all of which are fundamental to modern democratic governance in Britain. The Star Chamber's abuses and arbitrary procedures played a significant role in shaping the development of due process rights both in England and later in the U.S. English jurists and political theorists criticized the lack of basic legal safeguards. Over time, this criticism contributed to growing demand for legal reforms. So, the principles that emerged from the struggle against the Star Chamber, such as the right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, and the prohibition of arbitrary government action, influenced the development of constitutional law in England, and they were later incorporated into the English Bill of Rights, which laid the foundation for the modern concepts of due process and individual rights. When the American colonies declared their independence from Britain in 1776, they drew upon English legal traditions and their Enlightenment ideas to establish their own system of government. The framers of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights were keenly aware of the dangers of unchecked governmental power, including the kind of abuses exemplified by the Star Chamber. As a result, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights contain numerous provisions aimed at protecting individual liberties and ensuring due process of law. The Fifth Amendment, for example, guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Sixth Amendment provides for the right of a speedy trial and a public trial by an impartial jury. In this way, the abuses of the Star Chamber played a crucial role in shaping the development of due process rights and highlighting the importance of legal protections against arbitrary government action. But it wasn't just the Star Chamber that helped shape the Bill of Rights and the constitutional protections we enjoy. England had another card it played when even the Star Chamber couldn't be counted upon to deliver what the Crown wanted. A bill of attainder is a legislative act that declares a person or group guilty of a crime and imposes a punishment without the benefit of trial. Essentially, it is a law passed by a legislative body that convicts someone of a crime without judicial process. Historically, bills of attainder were commonly used in England and other European countries as a means for the monarch or ruling government to eliminate political opponents, suppress dissent, or confiscate property without the need for a formal trial. The bills were often used against individuals or groups perceived as threats to the authority of the government. Bills of attainder typically involve severe penalties like forfeiture of all lands, imprisonment, and even death, and they bypass normal legal safeguards. So, as a result, in the United States, the framers of the Constitution sought to prevent the abuse of legislative power by expressly prohibiting bills of attainder in Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution. It says, "No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed." This provision reflects the founders' commitment to the principles of due process and separation of powers, and it ensures that individuals are afforded the protections of a fair trial before being subjected to punishment by the government. So that is a brief historical summary of how we got the Due Process Clause and why we have due process in this country. I'll be expanding on this more with later videos where we talk about these processes and these concepts. So you might want to bookmark this one or put it in your watch later so you can come back and look at it again if you have questions about due process and things like the Star Chamber, that sort of thing. And that's what I have for you today. If you have any comments, leave them in the comments down below. And of course, you can always email me at the address above. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And if you have the opportunity today, go out of your way to do a kindness for someone. Doesn't have to be buying somebody a car. It can be buying somebody a soda over lunch, buying somebody lunch, something like that. Just do something nice. It makes the world a better place. And then come back tomorrow, join me down here, and we'll talk about something else interesting and useful. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.